Sexuality, though veiled in romance and sanctified by rituals of religion and culture, is at its root an engine of power. It moves nations through hairs, it sways leaders through scandal, and it governs households more than law or scripture. He who understands sex only as a pursuit of pleasure is like a man who mistakes the torch for the fire. He is dazzled by the glow, but he does not comprehend what the flame can destroy, or what it can illuminate. Throughout history, the powerful have always understood the hidden mechanics of sex. Kings did not merely take wives, they formed alliances. Concubines were not mere ornaments, but informants, weapons, instruments of espionage. Even in cloisters, where flesh was supposed to be denied, sex lingered like incense, not in form but in temptation, in dreams, in guilt, binding the soul more tightly than chains ever could. That which is forbidden is never forgotten, and the wise ruler does not forbid what he can bend to his will. The body is a battlefield, and sex is its most volatile weapon. The common man pursues it to escape himself, the strategic man uses it to know others. Observe how easily men betray principles, families, empires, for the fleeting promise of touch. Consider how the heart of the strongest warrior can be softened by a whisper in the dark. No throne has ever been so secure that lust could not topple it. No oath so sacred that it could not be undone by the scent of desire. There is no neutrality in sex. Even passivity is a position of power when understood properly. The one who gives, if conscious of their influence, can command more than the one who takes. The courtesan who knows her value will dictate the terms of the exchange, while the fool who believes he owns her body finds his soul mortgaged in return. The priest who preaches abstinence but suppresses desire creates a pressure that will one day shatter his authority. Those who believe they are immune are merely blind to the terms of their surrender. To dominate sex, one must begin by mastering their own appetite, not through repression. That is the art of cowards, but through redirection. Like the great rivers that carved civilizations, the flow of sexual energy can be harnessed. It can build temples, produce genius, stir revolutions. But if left undirected, it floods and destroys. The man who beds many without reflection remains a servant to his own loins. The man who knows when to touch and when to withhold becomes a sovereign over more than his body. He commands the minds and loyalties of others. It is no accident that religious orders and occult societies have long fixated on sexual rites. They understood that in the moment of orgasm, the veil between the material and the immaterial thins. But what they feared, or sought to veil, is the knowledge that this power does not belong to heaven, nor to doctrine. It belongs to the one who knows how to wield it with cold purpose. Sex is not evil, nor is it sacred. It is useful, and usefulness to the wise is the only form of holiness worth pursuing. Consider the lover who disappears after the conquest. He is not heartless, he is calculating. He has taken what he came for, not the body, but the leverage. Consider the spouse who denies affection to gain obedience. She does not withhold love, she negotiates from a higher ground. The battlefield of sex is rarely fair, because one side often fights for pleasure, while the other fights for control. And pleasure is fleeting, while control endures. The knave confuse surrender with connection. They believe that giving themselves sexually is an act of spiritual union. But union without awareness is enslavement. The wise do not give, they offer. They do not take, they receive. Every touch is deliberate, every kiss a maneuver, every encounter a negotiation in the war of influence. The bed is not a sanctuary. It is a throne or a scaffold, depending on who enters with their eyes open. The modern man, drowning in comforts and distracted by trivial pleasures, has confused spirituality with sentiment. He lights candles, chants hollow prayers, and adorns himself with symbols whose meaning he no longer studies. Yet he remains enslaved, to hunger, to lust, to fear. True spirituality does not bloom in softness. It grows in struggle, in silence, in the moment when instinct rises and is denied, not out of guilt, but out of mastery. The spiritual path is not a retreat from the world. It is the art of commanding oneself while moving through it. Instinct is the first governor of man. It tells him when to eat, when to flee, when to copulate, when to dominate. But if he lives only by instinct, he is no more sovereign than a beast in the forest. Discipline is what separates man from the animal, and spirituality is nothing but the highest form of discipline, one that extends beyond the body and into the dominion of the unseen. He who cannot command his appetite has no right to speak of God. He who is ruled by the tremors of his flesh cannot comprehend the stillness of the soul. There is a belief, popular among the weak, that spirituality requires the rejection of the body. They wear rags, they starve themselves, they mutilate the flesh, thinking this suffering earns them sanctity. But suffering alone is not holiness. It is merely another form of indulgence, often more arrogant than lust. The wise do not escape the body, they inhabit it fully. They study its demands, they test its limits, and then they bend it to their will. The path of spirit is not upward, it is inward, downward, deeper into the roots of being where the primal fire burns. Only there can true control be forged. Consider the man who fasts not to impress others, but to know hunger without obeying it. In him, the divine begins to stir. Consider the woman who chooses silence when provoked, not from fear but from strength. Her silence is louder than speech. The spiritual life is not a posture. It is not a costume. It is war, and the battlefield is within. Every day, the soul must overcome the body, not to destroy it, but to rule it as a king rules his people, not through cruelty, but through command. When instinct arises, the undisciplined obey, the disciplined choose, and the spiritual choose with awareness of consequences that stretch beyond the immediate. This is why the ancient mystics trained like warriors. They understood that the body is both the temple and the prison. Left unguarded, it becomes a gateway for chaos. Guarded with understanding, it becomes a vessel of power. The saints of old were not soft, they were severe. Their eyes saw through deception, not because they were gentle, but because they were ruthless with their own illusions. Spirituality is not comfort, it is clarity. It does not always feel good. Often, it feels like fire in the bones, like isolation in a crowded room, like standing still while the world runs mad with impulse. The spiritual man does not float above the earth. He walks firmly upon it, untouched by its noise. He is not numb to desire. He knows it intimately, has tasted it fully, and has chosen, without bitterness, to hold the reins rather than be dragged by them. Instinct whispers, now, take. Discipline replies, wait. Instinct cries, strike back. Spirituality answers, observe. These delays are not hesitations of fear. They are declarations of power. He who acts from instinct is always predictable, and therefore always controllable. He who acts from spiritual discipline is unreadable, and therefore dangerous. He can seduce without falling into lust. He can suffer without falling into despair. He can rule without being ruled. In temples, we see statues of gods seated, serene, unmoving. This is not passivity, it is domination. The warrior, saint is not the one who fights others, but the one who fights himself and wins. He feels the same rage, the same craving, the same urge to devour, but chooses his moment. When the body weeps for comfort, he offers it stillness. When the mind races with fantasy, he returns to breath. Every gesture becomes a form of resistance. Every denial becomes a declaration, I am not owned by what I feel. I am the one who chooses whether to feel it at all. When two bodies come together in the act of sex, the visible gesture hides a deeper transaction. It is not simply a mingling of flesh, but an invocation of ancient laws. Every touch, every breath, every movement is a cipher, one that reveals or conceals the soul's condition. The common man sees sex as entertainment. The wise recognize it as ritual. The bed is not merely a place of release, but a chamber where forces beyond the physical are awakened, aligned, or corrupted. To enter this space without awareness is to step into fire with eyes closed. The body is the mask the soul wears, but sex strips the mask away. For a moment, both participants are exposed, not just in skin but in essence. What is revealed in that moment is not always beautiful. Often it is shame, fear, need, domination, or the hunger to be devoured. Yet those who understand this unveiling do not run from it. They use it. They do not seek comfort, but truth. They do not lie naked only in form, but in spirit. They bring the fullness of their presence to the encounter and demand the same in return. In this, sex becomes a form of spiritual divination. When bodies unite with conscious intent, They produce a harmony that reflects divine structure. The rhythm of breath becomes prayer, the gaze becomes a mirror, and the tension becomes a rope that binds heaven to earth. In that moment, there is no man, no woman, only force, only current, only the dance of polarity. This is not romanticism, it is architecture. Just as temples are constructed to align with celestial patterns, so too can the union of bodies be arranged to call down the sacred into the profane. But without understanding, the same act becomes chaos, a clashing of energies that leaves both drained, disoriented, and farther from their center. The soul seeks recognition. In sex, it finds either reunion or exile. One can leave the body of another more empty than before, or more filled than words can express. This is why the ancients guarded sexual rites so closely. They knew that every body carries memory, that in the fluids, in the touch, in the silence after climax, energies pass that cannot be reversed. The unwise sleep with strangers and think it harmless. The wise know that no stranger leaves untouched. In the deepest sense, there is no such thing as casual sex, only unconscious initiation. To join in flesh is to open a door, and doors, once opened, invite guests of all kinds. One must ask what enters when I open myself. What do I take in along with this body, this voice, this desire? If sex is emerging, what am I merging with? The physical sensation is brief, but the energetic imprint can last years. Some carry the residue of past lovers like ghosts that whisper in moments of weakness. Others become addicted not to pleasure, but to pain disguised as connection. The soul, having touched another without alignment, recoils or clings, but it never remains neutral. There are those who practice sex as meditation. They slow the breath, still the mind, and enter the body not to consume, but to commune. In this, they become architects of ecstasy, not ecstasy as chaos, but as structured transcendence. The orgasm becomes not a collapse, but a rising wave that carries both beyond ego. This requires strength. It requires knowledge. It requires restraint and presence in equal measure. Without these, the act devolves into animal mimicry, and the soul retreats. Even in the most mundane coupling, something sacred or profane is always occurring. Two people carry their history, their trauma, their lineage, and their intent into the act. Nothing is neutral. If one enters with fear, fear is exchanged. If one enters with power, power is transmitted. If one enters with longing, longing grows. This is the mirror. The other becomes a reflection, a magnification, sometimes a distortion, and one must be prepared to face what is seen. To ignore this is to mistake the shadow for the substance. The act of union, when understood, becomes alchemy. Flesh is the lead, intention is the philosopher's fire. Through awareness, the base elements are transmuted. Through surrender, not of control but of masks, the soul emerges. This is not the sex of the marketplace, sold by image and drowned in noise. This is the sex of silence, of knowing, of mastery over chaos. The fool seeks to be righteous. The wise seek to be effective. In matters of sex and spirituality, this difference becomes most apparent. One man avoids all sexual activity and wears his abstinence like a crown, believing himself holy. Another plunges into indulgence and calls it freedom, mistaking surrender for liberation. But neither has understood the true nature of power. Celibacy and indulgence are not virtues. They are tactics, tools to be wielded according to one's aim. To assign moral superiority to either is to fall into the trap of appearances and abandon the throne of self-command. Celibacy, in its essence, is not about denial. It is about redirection. To withhold sexual expression is not inherently noble. It is only wise if the energy conserved is transmuted into something greater. The celibate who does not build, create, or ascend becomes stagnant. His unspent fire turns inward and begins to devour him. Frustration, resentment, delusion. These are the fruits of barren self-restraint. But the man who stores his sexual force and refines it through discipline becomes a furnace of focus, capable of acts beyond the common will. He does not abstain because he is afraid. He abstains because he is building an empire of the spirit, and he knows that every drop of his essence is a brick. On the other hand, indulgence is often condemned by the weak who envy it. But indulgence, when intentional and measured, becomes a study of the self. To experience desire fully is to understand its mechanisms. The one who has tasted deeply and then walked away has more strength than the one who has never dared to approach. True indulgence is not recklessness. It is calculated exploration. It is knowing exactly how far to go and when to stop. The libertine who knows his edge and does not cross it is more masterful than the ascetic who represses his longing out of fear. The common mistake is to believe that one must choose a single path and remain loyal to it as a moral identity. But in truth, the path shifts according to season, purpose, and necessity. The warrior in peacetime must learn softness. The monk in war must learn fire. There are times when celibacy is the sword, cutting away distraction, forging the soul in silence. There are times when indulgence is the teacher, stripping away illusion, revealing the ego through contrast and surrender. Neither is sacred. Both are dangerous in the hands of the unconscious. Religious institutions have often elevated celibacy as the higher road, but this has less to do with purity and more to do with control. A man without sexual entanglements is easier to govern. His energies are predictable, his alliances fewer, his passions dulled. But when celibacy is chosen, not imposed, it becomes a weapon. The man who walks into temptation and turns away, not out of shame but out of sovereignty, is one who commands himself utterly. His silence is not emptiness, but tension held like a drawn bow. Likewise, indulgence has been sold by empires and markets to keep the masses pacified. A man sated by pleasure seldom questions the system that feeds him, but indulgence with awareness becomes rebellion. It breaks the chains of taboo and exposes the mechanics of conditioning. To indulge without being consumed is a test few pass. The wise do not avoid the test. They take it and study the result. The body is neither enemy nor ally. It is terrain. And on this terrain, celibacy and indulgence are movements of the same campaign. Each has its cost, each its reward. One brings clarity, the other brings revelation. One offers focus, the other offers depth. The strategist does not commit to a tactic. He commits to victory and chooses his methods accordingly. Celibacy becomes poison when used to escape intimacy. It becomes power when used to forge concentration. Indulgence becomes ruin when used to numb. It becomes wisdom when used to learn. The question is not what you do with your body, but whether your spirit governs the act or is governed by it. This is the true line between virtue and strategy. The world may praise the chaste and scorn the sensual, but the world has always feared those who understand both and serve neither. The soul is not elevated by chains but by choice. The difference between repression and restraint is the difference between slavery and sovereignty. Repression is fear disguised as virtue. It is the burying of desire beneath layers of guilt, shame, and silence until it festers into madness or explodes in hypocrisy. Restraint, however, is power held in the palm, like a dagger not yet drawn. It is not weakness, but will. The one who represses is ruled by what he denies. The one who restrains governs what he feels and deploys it with precision. Desire itself is not the enemy. To desire is to be alive. The fire that fuels lust also fuels vision, ambition, creation, and transformation. To attempt to extinguish this fire is to misunderstand the essence of alchemy. The task is not to smother the flame, but to channel it, to forge from it light and heat rather than ruin. Repression builds a dam until the waters burst. Restraint builds an aqueduct, leading the current where it may serve the highest design. The difference lies not in abstinence or indulgence, but in awareness, intention, and control. The man who pretends not to desire is a liar to himself. His denial breeds fantasies that grow in the dark, untouched by reason. He may dress in holy garments, speak sacred words, and still be ruled by unseen compulsions. He becomes dangerous, not because of what he does, but because of what he hides. The repressed become manipulators. Their appetites surface in twisted forms, through domination disguised as leadership or control masquerading as care. They do not speak of their hunger, but it drips from their every word, their every law, their every broken oath. The restrained man walks differently. He does not lie to himself. He feels the fire rise and meets it with breath, not because he is afraid of it, but because he knows its cost. He allows the desire to speak, to move, to exist within him without immediate gratification. He holds it in silence like a secret weapon, and when he does act, it is not out of compulsion, but clarity. He chooses not because he must, but because he wills it. He may touch, he may walk away, but in either act, he remains centered. He does not shatter with temptation. He studies it. This discipline is not celebrated in the world. The market thrives on urgency. The masses are taught that to want is to need, and to need is to deserve. Entire systems of control are built on the failure of restraint. For every man who cannot say no, there is a seller who profits. For every woman who confuses attention for love, there is a culture that devours her soul. But the one who masters restraint breaks the cycle. He becomes immune to manipulation, unbound by distraction. His power is silent, and therefore more dangerous. Restraint is not the same as resistance. Resistance is conflict. Restraint is control. When one resists, he wrestles with his own hunger, turning it into an enemy. When one restrains, he rides it like a current, neither consumed nor cast adrift. He learns its rhythm. He watches it rise and fall. And in knowing it, he governs himself and others. In courts, in temples, in beds, such mastery is rare. Most seek to conquer others without first conquering their own flesh. They fall in love with images, with fantasies, with shadows of pleasure, never realizing that what they chase has already claimed them. Those who restrain themselves do not live cold lives. On the contrary, their fire burns hotter, deeper, more enduringly, because it is not wasted on every passing whim. They do not give themselves to the moment. They make the moment serve them. Their restraint is not absence. It is presence magnified. When they speak, they are heard. When they touch, it is remembered. Because every act is deliberate, every silence full, and every breath aligned with a greater law than instinct. In this way, restraint becomes the signature of the master. It is the quiet armor worn beneath silk and skin. It is the gaze that sees through temptation, and the will that does not tremble before it. It is not repression that elevates the soul, but the ability to feel without being ruled, to want without being taken, to burn without being consumed. In a world where flesh is worshipped and spirit is forgotten, the marriage of sex and spirituality remains one of the most misunderstood powers available to man. The body is not the prison of the soul, nor is the soul the enemy of desire. They are allies, or adversaries, depending on the strength of the will that governs them. The modern seeker, lost in doctrines, idols, and empty rituals, often forgets that the sacred is not found in denial nor indulgence, but in conscious engagement. It is not the act itself that defiles or sanctifies, but the clarity of the one who performs it. To approach sexuality with reverence is not to fear it, but to recognize it as a force of creation and destruction. It is the same current that births life, awakens visions, and topples empires. Without mastery, it consumes. With mastery, it elevates. Restraint over instinct, alignment over impulse, awareness over fantasy. These are the tools not of monks alone, but of rulers, strategists, lovers, and mystics. For to know the self through the body is to discover the hidden mechanisms of the soul. To command one's desires is to stand on the threshold of divine order. Those who seek truth must abandon the childish need for comfort and moral simplicity. Celibacy and indulgence are not paths of salvation. They are instruments in the hands of the wise. The union of bodies must mirror the union of souls, or it remains nothing but collision. And in this world of noise and endless appetite, the true victory lies not in renunciation, but in discernment, to walk among fire and remain unburned, to taste and not be enslaved, to wield the force of life and remain sovereign. There is no virtue in pretending to be pure, nor wisdom in pretending to be free. Only he who knows himself, his hungers, his power, his silence, can claim mastery. Not the mastery of others, but of self. And from that throne, he may touch the divine not through retreat from the world, but through disciplined participation in it. This is the true path, not abstinence, not indulgence, but command. Not repression, not surrender, but intelligent restraint. Let others sell pleasure. Let them trade piety. Let them chase love or fear or salvation. The one who understands sex and spirit as twin flames of the same fire needs none of it. He builds his temple not in words, but in his choices. He forges his soul not in fantasy, but in the crucible of action. And in the union of power and awareness, of desire and discipline, he does not become holy, he becomes whole.